29th of October 1970. Dearest Mandel, haven't heard from you for a while, so how's it going back there in the Arctic East? Are you bearing up well against the pressure of the Siberian winds and of your final year? Do let us know how life's going. It was brought home to me with a shock by your mother that it's a year since my father died on November the 9th. It's quite incredible that the time can have gone so quickly. I imagine Annie may be aware of the nearness of the date, and I'd be very grateful if you could drop her a card. I've written to Fabian asking him to go and see her, and should she want to make a journey to the crematorium, to accompany her. We shall, of course, arrange for flowers. I speak to her quite often, and she sounds in good form and high spirits, but I gather from Fabe that she tends to lapse a bit into a sort of absentness. Perhaps it's all been rather too much for her this past year, and the strain has told. But Fabe goes round there and keeps in touch, which is gratifying. She's very fond of him, and I'm sure his visits brighten her day a bit. I had a rather dreadful trip up to Edinburgh and back Sunday, Tuesday. It's an appallingly long way, 1,200 miles there and back, and I felt fairly knocked up when I eventually sagged down here. Today was beautiful, strong sun and a viney smell in the air, and I went with Mother into Beminster where she shopped, and we then turned off towards Netherbury to explore Marshwood Vale, which I'd not been near. We drove below Broad Windsor, through Silkhay, and caught sight of lanky, wind-swept Salukis leaping about inside a garden, so doubtless that is Miss Watkins' new joint. And we probed our way down narrow and often blind-end roads, circling south toward Whitchurch Canonicorum, via Shave Cross and Cutty Stubbs, and other lost places. It's an extraordinary area, a vast basin of almost empty country, rimmed by the hill ranges which link up with Pilsden Pen. The reason it's empty, I've read, is that the soil here is an impervious clay through which no water rises to supply a settler, or through which water doesn't sink in winter, so that it's poor farming country and a bleak, spongy bog in the bad weather. I had a letter from someone who has a cottage in Powerstock, saying that he and his wife often watched a pair of hobbies on Egerton, and that he thought they breed on the Crutchley's land, which is most exciting. Have you seen my Daily Mail pieces, by the way? They may interest you, as they're mostly about the mill and surrounds. Did you know that the pigeons are now installed? A cock and 2 hens, very beautiful snowy birds, which seem to be settling in quite happily, though God knows how we're going to keep Galley and the Dax from chasing them. They've now taken to hunting moles. There's a mole at large around the swimming pool, so all the lawn there looks like the Somme after heavy bombardment. The dogs have excavated huge craters trying to dig them out, damn them. We've also arranged for a pair of peafowl to come this year's hatching, so they'll be quite small and undecorative for a couple of years. Mother is well and in good spirits. Do take care of yourself, my dear girl, and put all you've got into this year, because whatever comes after, this will have been invaluable groundwork. I think of you often and wish you well. Your ever-loving Pa.
My father had always kept diaries as a record of everyday events for his own reference, but on occasions he would slip into these diaries undated personal notes of a much more private character.
The horrible loneliness of yet again in the silence and emptiness staring into those dead hours, tired, but unable to sleep, because of the endless debate in my mind about the pointlessness or point of prolonging years which increasingly now seem to me to have been misused or unused. Nothing of any value or originality accomplished, to be left behind, and nothing of that kind to come. The pain is back, and I wonder if there can be any purpose served in obediently seeing the boring and repellent illness given the slow-motion treatment it's supposed to have. Anyway, I'm pretty certain it's relapsed, so what can that mean in terms of time, income, maintenance of all one's commitments? And what is the prospect of getting better? Invalidism, working carefully at half-throttle, with stifled and half-dead existence. I don't feel any self-pity, only sorrow that the real burden and worry faces upon Betty and also the children.
Norwich, 1st of November, dear Papa. Sorry not to have written. I haven't felt much like writing to anyone. I'm finding the drug scene really depressing. I have a violent reaction against pot, let alone acid. I've seen it mess up so many people. It's a shame because so many people are involved that I sometimes feel excluded. Anyway, I've still got friends and we get by on our own level. Are you working well? Not overworking? Meeting your deadlines? Not tearing your hair out? I think I take after you in a lot of ways, and approach to work is one of them. Lots of love, M. P.S. I love your Daily Mail pieces. They were my idea, remember? My father's anxiety that we should all thoroughly and completely enjoy family events, as dictated by him, did at times become a terrific ordeal and burden to us all. But generally, his incisiveness and vigour, once he had entered upon a particular activity, was highly infectious, and we caught his mood of enthusiasm and involvement. Christmas was the most important ritual of all, and for all of us the most exciting. It was the one day in the year, every year, that was assuredly ours, and the family was certain to be together. For no matter what assignments were required of him, he always made sure that he was home on Christmas Day, and together we lived out his dream of a Dickensian Christmas, with rooms heavily decked with paper chains and holly, stocking presents, and then the parcels under the Christmas tree, branches over-adorned with tinsel and silver balls, my father presiding and handing out presents. Nuts, sweets, chocolates, dates, and a huge dinner, again presided over by my father, the table strewn with streamers, the remnants of crackers, paper hats, and games and music. And somehow, however dismal life was at the time, and however badly my father's work was going, we all managed to feel festive-spirited. The cloud on the horizon of Christmas 1970 was a commissioned biography of Harriet Beecher Stowe, which was long overdue and had become a standing joke and misery in the family.
Entrained between Crewkerne and Sherborne, 8th of December. Dearest Prudel, am trying to sway with the train, but this letter may be indecipherable. Longing to see you. Are you all equipped for Christmas? I've got Mother's present and her birthday one, and I'm going to try to get Fabian's 21st in London today. Gold cufflinks, I think. It seems so long since I was in direct touch with you, although I read all your letters home with pleasure and great interest in all your multifarious doings. You sound so spectacularly busy and with so many valuable things, and I don't mean work subjects alone. It's such an exciting period when one has broken into a new field of writing, but anguishing too, because the more one reads, the more one sees stretching and opening before, behind, and sideways, all the author's influences and his contemporaries and the like-minded. The whole Southern school is fascinating and regional in a way unknown in Great Britain. Among modern Southerners I'd say are worth reading are Eudora Welty, Carson McCullers, Harper Lee, Walker Percy.
My father gave us all the help he could in our chosen field of study. In fact, his enthusiasm for anything in which we took an interest frequently extended beyond our own enthusiasm. Once I casually mentioned that I had read and enjoyed Tender is the Night. The following day he handed me a file of newspaper cuttings on Fitzgerald and the author's complete works. My father's ebullience would affect me, and in this case I read Fitzgerald avidly and talked about him with my father constantly, until a different author arose to divert our attention. He devoted this same enthusiasm and energy to his trips abroad, and never failed to keep in touch with us while he was away and share his experience with us.
It now seems fairly sure that I shall be going off for about a month's filming immediately after Christmas, not to Indonesia, but to the South Pacific, probably starting in the Philippines and on to the New Hebrides, perhaps Tonga or Samoa, and ending up in Australia, though not to film there, which should be most interesting. Although at present I see it as a black, looming threat, which puts in jeopardy weekly columns, etc., not to mention the hideous Harriet. It would be so nice to have you all together under one roof. When you come through London, can you call at the flat? Or will that be out of phase with your plans? If you can, Shall be most obliged if you can get my spare repaired leg from the wardrobe and bring it down in the van. It won't be too gruesome. It's in a large bag. I'm going up for a foils luncheon at the Dorchester given for the Joan Bakewell-Nicholas Garland book, The New Priesthood, all about the TV Evil Eye medicine men. My love as ever, Papa. The Mill, 16th of December. Dearest Mandel, it seems such an age since I saw you, and it's delightful to know that although for such a short break you'll soon be back here and that we shall all be gathered together for Christmas. I think our first Christmas at the Mill will be a special occasion. Now, what about news here? Well, the peafowl are installed in the end stable, behind the dog's kitchen, and they're very lively birds. We're keeping them in for a few weeks more yet, but they're very comfortably accommodated with straw and perches and food and water. I climbed the pigeons' loft to feed them a few days ago, and I noticed that some of the twigs and straw we'd put up there, just in case they wanted to line their brooding chambers, had been used, and that a nest had been built in one. I felt in, and there was an egg. At this time of the year. They're really quite indefatigable. When I went today, there was the full clutch of 2, so we decided that now it really was quite safe to take off the wire netting at the front of the coat. So this I did this morning. Instantly, one of the hens, which was being carnally pursued by the cock, shot out of one of the entrance holes like a blue streak and hasn't been seen since. I terribly fear that she's gone for good. However, the other 2 shuffled out a bit uncertainly and then took to wing. It was super to see them in a brilliant blue sunlit sky trying out their wings for the first time. They climbed and spiraled and circled almost out of sight in the sky, getting their bearings, then eventually came and settled on the roof and spent the rest of the day there and on the barns. I scattered some corn for them on the forecourt, and they came down to feed on that, and then returned to the cote for the night. So I think they're safely settled. I'm just hoping that the other will sooner or later home in, but not certain by any means that we shall see it again. On Friday, after the programme, I went on to the Snows, who were having a party. It was very enjoyable, mostly painters and gallery directors and people in the art world. Peter and Maria were both delighted to hear that Fabe was at Leeds, which they think very highly of. I'm still struggling with the appalling Harriet. Must get it done before Christmas, before I go away. I've got a girl in the village to type the manuscript for me, so after tomorrow shall try to start feeding her with the opening chapters. Gally and Tilly and Duffy are all fine and fairly consistently badly behaved. They have, however, come to a sort of détente with the guinea fowl. In this scarcer time I've taken pity on them and taken to scattering corn for them, so they spend most of their time on my balcony. But even when they're down on the lawn, the dogs now tend to walk round them and the guinea fowl stay put. So they seem to have grown bored with overreacting to each other. It's very beautiful here. Do you realise that it's now over a year since Mother and I first saw the mill? The trees are bare now, and there are big flocks of fieldfare in the hedges. Lots of holly to cut. There was a vixen barking in the field for a few minutes last night. Take care of yourself, love. It'll be so nice to see you very soon now. Your affectionate Pa.
Diary, December 1970. It's ages since I wrote. The end of term was hectic, finishing essays, parties, etc. Pa came to collect me and drove me to London. I wish everyone wouldn't treat him like a freak. Makes me feel like a freak too. My friends, normally articulate, intelligent, outward-going people, clam up when Dad appears, so Dad thinks they're peculiar, and I'm stuck in the middle trying to convince Dad that they're really quite nice and assure them that Dad's not too bad, really. Stayed in London. Dad took me to L'Artiste Assoiffé. We had a really good evening and talked a lot, mainly about Scott Fitzgerald, whom I adore, and Hemingway, whom I dislike intensely, especially The Old Man and the Sea, which is highbrow trash, I think. So does Dad. Christmas was idyllic and perfect. Started snowing on Christmas morning. To complete the perfection, Daddy had at long last dragged himself through to the finish of the Harriet Beecher Stowe book. He's off on Monday to the Sun. Australia, Indonesia or Thailand, no one really knows. It's a magical mystery tour.
Queensland, 2nd of January 1971. Dearest Pooh, I'm sitting in a motel room in this town called Goondiwindi, not a joke from the Barry Mackenzie strip, which would remind you of the Midwest. Wide, empty street with soft shoulders and spaced split-level houses and a few gas stations baking under a chromium sun. We're all knackered. We've just, 3:30 p.m., arrived back from a 260-mile kangaroo hunt in the bush north of here, which started last night at midnight, led by a John Wayne type of roo shooter who holds a rifle in one hand and a spotlight in the other and blasts at the animals from his pickup truck. But, as one expects to be normal in stories, there were no roos. At 6:30 a.m. I was driving the car, with Bill ahead in the pickup truck, and I hit a bog, and the car sank up to its axles. We were 3.5 hours cutting young trees and stacking them and stones under the wheels and trying to spin it out, while the sun was burning at 90 degrees and one was tortured by flies and mosquitoes. Eventually we got out, and eventually Bill shot a roo, and we got a film of him slashing it to bits. I'm much more interested in Australia than I imagined I would be. Its quality is so distinctive and utterly different to anything I've met with before, despite this thin layer of American suburb feeling about the small towns. The countryside is indescribable, the size and stretch of it, which makes even the United States look built up and local. This isn't mountain country, but just unending rolling plains of untouched scrubby woodland and park-like expanses, full of strange and wonderful birds and beasts. We saw emu grazing, many parrot-like birds which I simply can't identify, and hawks and falcons of unknown kind. The shining air rings with cries which have never before encountered one's ears, and there is a fantastic profusion of butterflies, some sparrow-sized, and even the trees, many, of course, eucalyptus, are strange to the eye. I can't predict when I'll next have a chance of actually sitting at a desk for half an hour and writing a letter to any of you. One is always hastening somewhere with bags and notebooks and phone numbers and plane tickets. What a way to earn a living! Although this will be certainly a memorable experience, I'm reminded again that whizzing about the globe isn't for me anymore. Take care of yourself. All love, Pa. Suva Airport, 22nd of January. Darling Pooh, we were up at 4 a.m., theoretically to fly from Fiji to Tonga, and it's now 11:15 a.m., are slumped in the potting shed-sized lounge while several men hammer desultorily at the DC-10 parked on the runway. Fiji seems interesting, what we've seen of it, and very different from the coral atolls tufted monotonously with palms upon which we've been living for the past month. Dramatically jagged mountains, much sugar cane, and more cosmopolitan mixture of Indians who outnumber Fijians, and every permutation of mixed Polynesian and Mexican blood. Otherwise, the Pacific is amazingly like a stage set for Sadie Thompson, with a touch of Night of the Iguana. Seedy, stagnant one-street harbour towns with shipping offices, steamship stores, and Chinese groceries. Somerset Maugham suburbanites working for copra companies and rather degenerate Conradian beachcombers. I think the trip is going okay, but gruelingly. We shall have covered 30,000 miles by the time we're back. The distances to be covered on and between stories are immense. I managed to get a taxi into Suva and found 4 letters from you all, which was super. Thank you so much for all the news and gossip. Keep your cool about finals. I'm certain you'll distinguish yourself, but even if the luck should be less than good, you will have a trained mind. Longing to see you all. Pa.
Somehow he found in Tonga a "Congratulations on the birth of a grandchild" card. In it he wrote,
Dearest Mandel, met the King yesterday at the soccer match. He's very keen on soccer, so had 3 games going on simultaneously. He is most majestic. He weighs 25 stone. We were at the palace today. It's rather like Shaw's Corner. We leave here on Thursday, back to Fiji. Then, if all goes to schedule, to Sydney, Melbourne if time permits, Perth, Johannesburg, London. Longing to see you. Went today to where huge colonies of flying foxes, fruit bats, hang in clusters in trees and swoop through the air like pterodactyls. Much love, Papa.
In March, after returning from the South Pacific, he went to New York to recce for a film on wildlife in the city. He sent me a 3D postcard of a poodle snarled up in a basket of wool with the message, "You thought I was joking, didn't you?" He wrote to me on the flight over.
The Presidential Special en route New York, 17th of March. Dearest Poodle, on this ridiculous jumbo jet, it's rather like being propelled at 600 miles per hour in a 40s hamburger bar. Nothing works. The Mid-Atlantic movie didn't come up on the screen, and none of the plastic compartments does up. There's headphone 8-way music, the big bands, semi-classical, mood music, etc. I'm halfway into Michael J. Arlen's biography of his father, the light-pop, semi-classical, smart bestseller of the International Cunard Line 20s, The Green Hat, etc. It's a sad, rootless autobiography. A childhood in grand hotels and governesses and the Corniche, à la Nabokov, and émigré destitute aristocrats, the detritus of the New Order 30s. Who was it who said, if we live long enough, we understand our father. If we're lucky, we live long enough to forgive him. I wonder not infrequently if you and your brothers will do either. I was immensely affected by your corporate thoughtfulness in sending the flowers and the message yesterday to your mother and me. I do value that. It seems to me conceivable at those times that perhaps I haven't been disastrous to you all. I think perhaps none of you fully realize the happiness I gain from you and from seeing you filling out into creative individual people. I suffer for you particularly at this time, having to settle in hand-to-hand combat the scholastic score, but you mustn't allow these tensions to overcome your innate sense of what is important and relevant. Super if you get a splendid degree, but that hasn't been fundamentally why you've been to university. So, whatever else you may find it hard to forgive me for, don't hold that against me. Most of all, I want you to express yourself, and that you have to do in your own style and manner, and not according to anyone else's ideas. Be certain of yourself. You have reason to be. You know that you have my love and admiration always.
However, one of the private notes to himself that he was in the habit of slipping into his diary gives some indication of the anguish behind his seemingly cheerful and easygoing professional persona.
I dread the thought of leaving Betty with so little materially, and not very much in compensating happy memories. I regret to a very melancholy degree that for so long Betty and I haven't been as deeply involved with each other as we should and could have been, but for my deliberate estrangement because of fears of demands on me that I couldn't meet. And yet I know that I've lost so much because of this distancing from a person of beautiful spirit and mettle. How foolish we are. I wish I and Betty and the children could have in conjunction lived with greater happiness and sense of the moments together. I am possessed by this recognition now of my own insensitivity and impatient indifference to bereavement and loneliness and the loss of someone near. My mother dying of cancer on that sofa at Bushey. And what I remember is my discomfiture, my distaste for disease, sickness, death. Did I write to my father when my mother died? I don't believe so. Nor to my uncle when my Aunt Patty died. I remember his bewildered face at the funeral, Yet really it meant little to me. I suppose I'm being cowardly about this situation. But it is also guilt and...
Diary, Dorset, 16th of April. Easter was glorious, and the weather was idyllic. The Hadfields were here, and John and Liz Fowles came over. They actually swam. So did Pa, though he didn't last long. Everyone was very good-humoured and relaxed. Tris came down from Bristol, and his friend Barbara turned up, and Rob and Sue, and Fabe was here with Jill. Barbara and Rob helped me work out a revision timetable for finals and a literary calendar to refer to, and we went for long walks at Ypres and Chesil Bank. Now I have to get down to serious work. I've lost all sense of direction and decisiveness. I feel wavery and doubtful and distant, and yet have to face the looming future. So, for the next month, I'm going to be utterly selfish and uncompromising, and if anyone asks me why, I'll blame it on finals.
The Mill, 30th of April. My very dear daughter, mainly to double establish, for you don't need to be told, that you have our warmest and most confident wishes for your nearing acid test. From all I've seen and gathered, you seem to me to have tackled the situation in an exemplary manner of well-organised work, and that is bound to pay off. I can't say I envy you, but I do admire both the spirit and the system with which you've tackled the job. Now all you need is some good luck in the exams themselves, so here's wishing you vast helpings of it. I've been reflecting a little on your future activities after all this is over. I understand from Mother that you're still far from being seized by a vocational fervency for anything in particular, and that she floated the thought of doing a year's VSO. I'm bound to say that I couldn't support that idea. Of course, I'm not for a second trying to tell you what you should do, but it may be of help if I tell you the way I see your situation. I feel that your leanings towards an academic career will be worth pursuing only if you get a brilliant degree, which would propel you into some of the more desirable and elitist areas. This is being quite calculatedly hard-eyed about it. Below that level, the educational second best can be pretty drab and stodgy as a life. I mean, 30 years in Aberystwyth or something similar. Still, there are, of course, other ways of seeing this, branching out abroad, etc. In any event, I don't think spending yet another year doing what might well in itself be fascinating, but which is likely to be a period of treading water before pushing off and swimming, is at this point going to serve you best. I think you'd be well advised to charge pell-mell into a field before you feel too old to start at a point equal to that of others 2 or 3 years younger than you. I also understand from Mother that you're thinking of writing to the BBC. I would strongly support this. Although I'm convinced that you could succeed conspicuously in journalism, I'm equally convinced that you could do well on either side of the camera. Now the snags. You know the difficulty Tris had. The period of expansion in the BBC, and I suppose on the other side, has slowed down, and there were about 3 Oxbridge graduates taken out of 5,000 applications last year. I would certainly make a head-on application. It might mean starting in any capacity you can tunnel in at. I'm absolutely confident that once you were in such an organisation, you could quite quickly get through to the creative and responsible kind of post you could so well handle. I don't mean this as a backhanded compliment when I say that you couldn't be less qualified than many. No more lecturing. But do let me know if you want me to canvass around at the BBC and see what possibilities there may be. It's a beautiful afternoon here after days of blanketing sea mist. The greater spotted woodpecker was on the bird table again. The buzzard wheeled over yesterday. It's rather fabulous having a buzzard over one's garden, isn't it? 38 species of bird in and around the garden so far. Mother and I were pretty desolate and anxious last night. Tilly and Duffy disappeared for hours on end, and Mother was convinced they were drowned. Long after dark, we were probing around in the fields with torches. They reappeared out of the darkness at 10 p.m, caked with soil, and had obviously been rabbiting down deep warrens. Don't bother writing, love, except to say if you want any books sent, or want me to make any inquiries. Every good wish, and my fondest love, Pa.
Diary, Norwich, 13th of May. Dear, oh dear, oh dear. Finals have begun. Confusion reigns. I can't think at all. Finals are totally stultifying. It's worse having started. The climax is over, and we all have to plod along, alternately bored and hysterical and generally fed up, and we are all incarcerated in this grotesquely unnatural period of time with nothing but void beyond. Meanwhile, Daddy is worrying about my future. What future? I can't even imagine a future at the moment. It's totally unreal and quite terrifying. After 3 years of refuge, we're all going to have to face the great wide world. And we won't have each other to cling to anymore. God, what a dreadful thought. I'd rather postpone the future till this present torment is over.
The Mill, 18th of May. Darling Mandel, it was so nice hearing your voice on the line today. Truly, loved one, we do understand the sense you must have of being in the maximum impact point of a disaster area and strategic target, with the sirens wailing louder every second. But 'twill soon be a memory, and will scale down to its correct perspective in your life. We shall be sweating with you anyway, and hoping for good luck in the papers you get, and that the wind is blowing in the right direction, and spring flowers are in blossom, and the balance of payments is in good shape, and the German mark holding its own, and ping-pong games in progress between East and West. All other signs and omens are propitious. A gorgeous day here today. Gally, as you know, has had her gynecological op, poor thing, and your mother brought her back in a woozy, drunken state, with her legs buckling under her and swathed in bandages. She was really marvellously good. Today she had her stitches out and is very much better, but she's feeling very sorry for herself and slumps in a corner, gazing accusingly at us with bloodshot eyes and demonstrating why the term hangdog was invented. I think now she's really rather enjoying being fussed over and everyone making sympathetic and consoling noises, and she's rather acting up to it, like Elizabeth Barrett Browning. I had an outing on to Egerton last week with Brian Jackman, the young man on the Sunday Times who has a cottage at Powerstock. He showed me the way over the high bluff, and we walked along a ridge which reminded me of Baggy Point. Do you remember? It's an immense limestone promontory with the land scooping away in immensity to rough woodland and vales where deer and foxes wander. Meadow pipits were singing, and linnets, and kestrels hanging over the hillsides, and we watched a buzzard spiralling out of the distant oak forest of Powerstock Common and up on a thermal. And while up there we saw a very rare bird, the Montague's harrier, which I shall tell you about, but which must be treated with fantastic circumspection. The dam isn't working properly. Duffy and Tilly escaped again. I can't get proper work done on either my New York script or my book, and fritter away the days in the midst of what Rennie Cutforth in this week's Listener calls writer's blight. Don't take up writing. Take up something harmonious and flowing and tangible, which doesn't mean scraping your breastbone bare all the time. Like cooking scones for a little bow-windowed shop in Beminster. Take care, my dear, and put your trust in God and a benign, well-fed and happily married external examiner.
The next correspondence from my father was a telegram of congratulation addressed to Miss Amanda Allsop, B.A. Honours, and the message, "Well done. Delighted and very happy for you. Much love, Pa." I graduated in June 1971. I spent a few weeks in Israel, then returned to London, found a flat, and started seriously looking for work. My father had assumed that I would go into journalism, an assumption I happily went along with. He was in the process of moving from his small flat in St John's Wood to one in Notting Hill.
The Mill, 6th of October. Dearest Mandel, delighted to hear you fixed up a flat, which will remove one of the pressing problems and release your thought and energy for the job. I imagine you must be a bit hard up. Here's a bit to keep you going. As you suggested, it would be nice and perhaps a useful time now to meet next week. Could you have lunch with me on Monday the 11th? I shall be more available than I usually am on a Monday, I hope, as I won't be travelling up that morning. I have to do a day's recording at Southampton on Sunday, so shall travel up to London on Sunday evening and spend the night in the wreckage and debris of the flat, so shall be at Lime Grove promptly Monday a.m. If you could manage to get along there about noon, or really any time around lunchtime, we could go down to the club. I think it would be extremely valuable if we could have a general talk about your programme now that you've got a living place settled. Try not to get too dispirited and disheartened. It's a bad time, but anyway it's never, except by the utmost luck, easy to bore in at the right place. I think it's a very sensible move to take up this typing improvement course, but we have to make sure that you don't get stuck in a typing job. I'll bring up your curriculum vitae, and when you've approved it, I can get it run off and Xeroxed, so you'll have plenty of copies to spare. Do hope to be seeing you on Monday. Your ever-loving Pa.
My father spent a couple of weeks on a BBC film trip to South America.
Flying between Caracas and Antigua, 19th of January. Darling Mandel, an action-packed 10 days which really was a fascinating experience. Scarlet ibis in the mangrove swamps of the lagoons of eastern Venezuela, caimans, alligators, in the roadside swamps, hummingbirds in the hotel tropical gardens inside the drunken area, also marvellous in your actual steaming jungle around Canaima with ocelot, jaguar, tapir, etc. How are you, my dear? I hope you're happy and sanguine. I think you've had a very testing time since graduating, and I admire the way you've stuck it out and gone on chipping away at what attracts you. It's the only way, but it's not an easy way. Yet you've not been deterred, and that is the best stand to take in the long run. What makes me particularly happy is that the three of you stay in such close and trusting contact. The Allsops tend to be a fractious lot, and their blood seems often to be thinner than water, so it's so good to see you and your brothers so loyal and loving towards each other. This is something I've been wanting to say for some time, but somehow the exigencies of living seem to operate against its expression. So aircraft and the limbo they impose do, oddly enough, give one of the fleeting interludes in which to say these neglected things. Don't let it lapse in later life. Perhaps, as an only child, I put undue weight on the values of family and having those you can rely upon and come to. But I don't really think so. I think you three have got an exceptionally sound relationship, and it matters to me very deeply that it lasts for you all. How nice it will be to be out of that Latin American garbage heap, where all the 3 million inhabitants of Caracas have 3 million beat-up Pontiacs spreading a blanket of smog. Take care of your dear self. All my love, Pa.
It wasn't until I'd spent several months battling with every available weapon to get into journalism that I realised that I wasn't really prepared to push hard enough or to take very much of the graft, and therefore I wasn't committed enough to journalism. I turned all my forces towards publishing, which appealed much more, and after another period of battling and further unemployment, I was offered a job in Penguin Education. My father accepted the change happily once he realised I was serious. I decided also to live on my own and moved into a single flat in Notting Hill. While I was in London, we met up frequently for a meal or a drink, so there was less correspondence. Diary, September 1972. Took part at the Electric Cinema. Very funny parody of the Western. Very embarrassing, too. Dad kept sniffing the air and saying, "What's that smell? It doesn't smell like tobacco." He must have known. I kicked him, but it was the wrong leg. So I whispered to him to shut up, and he said very loudly, "Why are you whispering? I can't hear you." I was so embarrassed. Maybe it was better than falling asleep, which he usually does in cinemas, or worse, in theatres. When I was in the National Youth Theatre's Midsummer Night's Dream, he sat snoring throughout, in the front row, and all the other actors commented because they could see him. They thought it was funny. I could have died. Since leaving university, I had been making notes with a view to a novel. During 1972, ideas began to crystallise, and the novel became an increasingly important part of my life.
The Mill, 27th of July. Dearest Poodle, what a nice, relaxed and happy evening that was together. How silly it is that we so seldom find time for those kind of meetings. It was good to be able to talk to you so fully about your activities. I really do think that having got settled in your own roost will give you the cornerstone you needed. Riding down on the train, I was reading the current issue of the New York Review of Books on 3 novels reviewed by Thomas R. Edwards. None of the novels sounded especially good. One was by Michael Crichton. Edwards has some perceptive things to say about the novel which struck me as a continuation of some of the problems of writing about, or out of, one's experience. He says that most novels really have to be considered as commodities, produced and distributed like frozen peas, and goes on, since a world full of people doesn't usually feel like a world full of God, the novel, from its beginnings, has dwelt upon the secular life, men and women making do in a realm God hasn't visited for quite a while. Here people are on their own. They have careers instead of vocations. Stories don't always predict their own endings. Meaning is not found in events, but gets attached to them, more or less provisionally. Very much the difficulty John Fowles was trying to overcome in The French Lieutenant's Woman, deliberately leaving options open and resisting being held as the writer to the predetermined line which his mind had tried to impose upon him. Edwards continues, living in a world whose mysteries may be meaningless, secular man is necessarily man in trouble. Rather than learning truth, he can at best only solve problems, and his temporal rewards, like money and marriage, seem finally enigmatic or ambiguous, spiritually speaking. The novelist may heroically settle for social blessings, as Jane Austen and Fielding did, or, like Dickens, James, and Tolstoy, he may weigh the compromising costs of social accomplishment, how it shall not profit a man to gain the world. But genuine mystery always comes out as something of an embarrassment. I don't think you should worry too much about your plot, because there aren't such things in life, therefore nor in convincing novels about life. Of course, actions and events have consequences, sometimes, not always, and it can be amusing and or frightening to see how they resurface in their random way at a later stage, but they are so often self-deciding. Just an attempt to define better a point I was touching upon. I've just remembered that you'll be here tomorrow, so I shan't post this, but leave it here for you. Your ever-loving Pa.
Notting Hill, 16th of November. Dear Father, I won't be around tomorrow after all. The Conformist is on at the Electric, and Tuesday is the only night that both Gordon and I can go, and we have planned to go together. I have been trying to check up on the architecture of the Anglo-Saxons. My curiosity has been aroused. I can't believe that local farmers would have destroyed completely Athelstan's castle while leaving good solid relics of King John. So, it emerges that while you're correct about stone, it wasn't the commonest building material. Pre-Norman buildings would have been constructed of wood, stone, brick, or a mixture of either 2 or 3 of these. So the castle did comprise degradable material as well as stone. My source isn't all that good. I'd like to learn a lot more. It's fascinating to discover the strength of the Saxon culture. For remnants of building, clothes, pottery, literature, music, etc., to still be with us and influencing us, despite the Norman influx, is amazing. I can't see much of our present culture surviving, and there's not much I'd want to see around in 1,000 years' time. Anyway, there you are. I probably won't see you this week, but do call next week. I would enjoy a meal with you. If you just let me know that you'll be around on a particular evening, I'll wait. Much love, Mandy.
Notting Hill, 1 a.m., 18th of November. I'm sorry not to have answered your note straight away, but today was pell-mell, and last evening, after my takeaway Kentucky fried chicken and Jamaica date pasty, served by a Pakistani in Portobello Road's Chinatown, I had to work on scripts for the edition programme. Now I've just got back from doing it. I think a punchy show, but at the cost of terminal exhaustion. That's interesting stuff on the Anglo-Saxons you dug up. You must have a look through my Dorset library. Quite extensive now. I dare say there'll be some quite specific stuff to be found there. Hope you enjoyed the flicks. All love, Pa. The Mill, 6th of January, 1973. Dear Mandel, I've been unhappy about the zigzag of lightning dissonance in what was otherwise such a nice evening, and I'm sorry for my disproportionately cutting words. I was in a pretty exhausted state. Therefore, I'm afraid a bit overstrung and nerves easily snapped. Although we made up, I don't think that in the conversation that followed I sufficiently well put my attitude to your plan to try to prove that you can be the writer you want to be. In other words, I want you to know that I'm not merely willing to give any help I can, but that A, I admire your spirit and determination to do this, and B, have a certainty in my bones that you have it in you. One develops an instinct for picking out the real writer from the would-be writer, and I know you're in the first tiny minority. But don't let this loom too large as a traumatic test for yourself. Certainly put your back into it, but be relaxed about it and enjoy the period. Serious, but not do or die. Just work concentratedly but unflurried, and don't feel that you've got to produce something of shattering significance out of it. You've grown into such a worthwhile person. You give me much inner joy, not often enough vocalized. I want you to be happy about this sabbatical. Write not as if a sword is suspended over your head, but like a bird on the wing. Fondest love, as ever, Papa.
This was the last letter he wrote to me. I left my job in April and moved into a small cottage in the grounds of the mill and began to write. On the 11th of May, my parents went to Exeter for the West Country Writers' Congress, where my father met up with a very dear and briefly estranged friend, Henry Williamson. There were warm greetings all round, my father wrote in his diary. He had recently been fitted with a new artificial leg, which caused him pain and despondency, as did the recurrence of the kidney infection. But there were compensations. The weekend of the 18th to the 21st of May, my parents went to Wales and were exhilarated by the countryside and the bird life. The 20th of May was a red-letter day. 2 kites, 2 buzzards, a kestrel, and a peregrine falcon and tiercel sighted in one spot. On the way back to Dorset on the 21st of May, he returned to watch the peregrines and felt satisfied and full of delight for them. On the 23rd of May, it was my 24th birthday, and I'd gone to the Chelsea Flower Show with my mother. My father was at home. He was due in London that evening to present an ecological programme called Down to Earth.
My dear Betty, I'm sorry to cause you this last distress. After you had left, I prepared to get up. The dud kidney was aching. There was a lump up on my stump. I sat on the bed trying to force myself, literally, to pull myself together and grind into action again, but sat filled with grave frustration at the disappointment of the new limb. And quite suddenly all these lines intersected at what I saw was a terminal point. I know that legal pedantry won't allow that this could have been a rational decision of mine, but it seems to me permissible for a person to come to an objective conclusion that he's had enough. I feel utterly worn out by the pain and the strain, by the struggle to maintain the outward appearance of capability and normal physical output. I hate the idea of giving in. I've never, as you know, believed that one should, but I think it's sensible and logical to recognize what is the optimum, and 30 years has been a long time to keep this broken-down mechanism at full steam. Long enough, I'm decided. How dismal to put her down to a stop, to disintegrate, especially when you've had such a head start as I. I'm so glad that we had that morning watching the peregrines together. That was one of the happiest times of my life, a fulfillment. Yet I suppose now I can see that there was something of this finality in that. The only peregrines left in Cardiganshire, and their single baby on that high, eerie ledge looking across that wide, bare, beautiful valley and its crashing white ribbons of water down the scree, looking into an emptiness for itself. The tiercel and falcon, when they ringed up into the bright sky and fell in those tumbling dives down the crags, free spirits, were so right. And everything which we represented, our race which poisons them and shoots them and steals their eggs and young, so wrong. We are the predators and killers, not these peregrines, for they and the few of their kind which survive, but not for much longer, live exalted lives, true to their nature, and we degrade and damage their world, which is so beautiful and complex and balanced. I'm glad that the children are individual and independent people who know what must be loved and what must be despised. My dear, I'm most of all glad that we have been together all this time. No one could have been stauncher and more giving of her strength when a transfusion was badly needed. You must never feel any responsibility at all for this. It's entirely my internal decision. Your love has kept me upright and in action as long as I have been. The exhaustion I feel, which has brought me to where I don't feel able physically to stand up to the wear and tear, is more than anyone, even someone as brave and loyal as you, could have replenished. In an immediate sense, I feel guilty about letting Will Wyatt down about tonight's programme. That's rottenly unprofessional behaviour. But for once, you might say, there's a deadline which has priority. More deeply, I regret that I never did write some of the books I would have liked to have got onto paper. I think I could have brought a small spotlight of illumination to our period if I could have had time to produce that autobiographical reflection upon the suburban boy growing up on the edge of the countryside. I suppose that's what I've always felt to be, on the edge, but preferring it there to the safe centre. After all, it's a better observation point than being part of that mass in the middle, precarious, but where you can hold on to some identity. I shan't be able to see that party for dear Mirek. I wish I could have had a sustained go at the wreckers and spoilers in the Sidgwick book, and the Origins of Fascism book on which all those hours at Merton went unfinished. I never went with John along the Undercliff. I suppose it is rather self-important to pick out credentials and endorsements, but I find my mind going back to some preachy letters which I wrote to Mandy when she was a teenager, and remember quoting Fitzgerald's definition to his own daughter of the best aim, which always seemed to me pretty complete. Be useful and proud. And also what he said in My Generation. That old libel that we were cynics and skeptics was nonsense from the beginning. On the contrary, we were the great believers. But as you know, my dear, I've come to feel, as Scott did in his journal entry, that there is no ground under our feet, and especially under my lousy faked-up tin one, and the other flaking out leg. I don't admire myself for giving up fighting, but I'm weary, and the stamina is less. I'd rather not see myself take to sticks. Forgive me, if you can, for the shock and worry this will bring you. Perhaps later, when the debris has been cleared away, it'll be a bit of a release for you. You have always been my whole love. Separately, there are some jottings which may be useful. I shall have some blue Vinny and onion and a glass of wine. Then I shall take off this bloody leg and lie down. Kenneth.